Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next series of webinars. I'm very happy to introduce today's presenter, Linda Chu. She had a really great presentation last week. Let me give a brief introduction about Linda Marie Chu. She's a former English language fellow in Tajikistan. Linda attended graduate school at Eastern Michigan University, where she received her master's in art in TESOL. She began teaching ESL to students at the University of Detroit and later in Korea, Japan, Spain, Singapore, and various other countries. At home, Linda taught at the Center for English as a Second Language at the University of Arizona. As the Assistant Director of Global Programs, she wrote proposals and grants and developed course content. Linda has organized teaching and training programs and has trained teachers from many parts of the world. Her last assignment as an English language fellow took her to Tajikistan. Currently, Linda is a member of the TESOL Career Path Development Professional Learning Network leadership team. We are very happy to host you, Linda. And now I'll give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gulnodo, and thank you to the English Without Borders team for organizing and having all of these wonderful webinars. They have been great, and what a great source of information for to disseminate to people. So, and thanks to my audience, especially to my Tajik friends for joining us today. We're going to be talking about communicative teaching. And let me just share my slides now. Okay, so communicative teaching, and as it relates specifically to speaking. So first, what we're going to do, my computer doesn't always cooperate. There we go. Okay, so communicative teaching, we're going to look first of all at what is communicative teaching, what is the approach with this, because communicative teaching is a big topic and it means many things to many people. So how are we going to define it in this context? And then from there, we'll look at how does the approach translate into strategies for your teaching? And from there, the next step is to how do those strategies translate into teaching activities of what you can do in your classroom. And then we'll look at some specific activities that you might try. We'll look at poetry, pictures, comics, games, and then finally at the end, I would like to talk just a little bit about the flipped classroom, and we'll describe all of this. So what is communicative teaching? As I said, it's such a big topic and it means many things to many people. The key word, of course, being communicative, it is how are we communicating? We want our students to be able to communicate. It's not that we are not looking at grammar, we're not throwing that out, but we are trying to, at times, give students the power to be able to use what they know to communicate. So we have two versions here, the teacher's version and the learner's version. And so we're looking at lowering inhibitions. What does that mean to the learners? It means fear not, right? Don't be afraid. So you want to create an environment in your classroom where students feel comfortable. They feel comfortable making mistakes. It's okay to make a mistake. They're not going to be chastised for making a mistake. We want to encourage them to take risks with the language. We're trying to build their self-confidence. This is a big part of language teaching. Your students have to believe that they can do it. develop the motivation intrinsically or inside of themselves, the desire to learn the language. And we want to encourage cooperative learning. What does that mean? Translates usually in the classroom into group work and sharing. It's a kind of shared knowledge rather than just an individualized knowledge. Using right brain processes, looking at the big picture of things, as I said, not focusing so much on the detail at the moment. We're going to look at the big picture. Ambiguity tolerance, coping with chaos. So every language has its rules, its nuances, and you need to get used to being okay with the verb coming at the end, for example, which may be very different from your own language. Practicing intuition, going with your hunches. As you all know, with language learning, you're going with your best guess sometimes. You may not be 100% sure, but you're going to try it and go for it. Process error feedback, meaning it's okay to make a mistake, and you need to have your students feel very comfortable in your classroom and comfortable making mistakes. And setting personal goals. Help your students set their own goals for language learning and what it is they want to accomplish. And also showing them how much they have already accomplished. Sometimes they don't realize it, but they have. So with these ideas, how do we translate them into our classrooms? Right? It's great to have this idea of saying, oh, students learn this way. Students learn better when they have a comfortable environment. How do you translate that into your classroom and into strategies that you're going to use? So for the first one of lowering inhibitions, what's better than games and role plays and songs and group work? This kind of activity, even though it is a learning activity, it's learning in a way that creates an environment for students to be able to be more comfortable and to work together with other students. We're encouraging risk-taking. What are we going to do there? Praise the effort. This is on the teacher's part. We're not praising just every day, praising and all the time, because that the students will start to feel as if it's not genuine, right? But make an effort as a teacher to give students the praise that they need, and they start to feel that you're building their self-confidence that way. You want to develop their intrinsic motivation. Their desire to learn is what is important, because you won't be around as a teacher all of the time. So you need the students to feel as though they are learning because they want to learn. That's the best kind of learning, isn't it? And then promoting cooperative learning, having students share what they know. This is what happens in real life. We don't live in a bubble with our own head, right? We interact with other people, and that's what language is, communication. And so having students do pair work and group work actually promotes that kind of thing. Using movies, free writing, using pictures in class, all of those things are helping with the right brain processing of things. So you are encouraging in your classroom an environment where students feel free to go ahead and try to use the language. Praising good guesses. We all have to make good guesses in our language, right? Sometimes we self-correct when we find we've made an error. So it is not, we're not saying, once again, never correct students. We, of course, as teachers, that's part of our job, but especially during these kinds of activities that we're using, we want students as much as possible to feel comfortable with what they're doing. and have the mistakes work for the learner, right? This is one example of what teachers sometimes do is record learners, especially if, for example, if they're giving a presentation, maybe use the correction process later, but at the time, let the students go ahead and communicate. Okay, all right. So, what speaking activities promote beliefs about communicative teaching? So we're going to take a look now. So we've gone through the process, the approach, and then the strategies of how we're going to get that in the classroom. So let's take a look at some very specific activities. The first one is using poetry in the classroom. And this one is using the 5 senses, okay? And you can see our teaching points there. This one definitely promotes metaphors and similes. So let's give an example first. This is an example of what the students are going to do, and then I will walk you through the process of how to do this in your classroom. So because I live in Tucson, Arizona, and it is a desert, I'm going to give you an example using the desert. The desert is red and yellow. It tastes like a hot chili pepper. It sounds like snakes rattling their tails. It smells like the burning sun. It looks like red rocks and dull sand. It makes us feel hot and thirsty. So the students are going to follow the pattern. So you're going to teach them this very pattern of naming the poem, and then the first line is going to have something to do with color, in this case red and yellow, and then you'll see it tastes like, it sounds like, it smells like, it looks like, how does it make us feel? Okay, that's the general pattern of this particular activity. So how do you do it? First of all, use topics that are familiar to the students. For example, holidays, sports activities, seasons, childhood memories. These are all things that students would be able to talk about. Even at a lower level, you can use something like this because students will have some kind of general knowledge about these topics. And then as a whole group, the whole class is going to choose one topic. So, and you can facilitate that by maybe brainstorming some topics and then have the class vote on which topic they would like to use. In this example, the students chose my grandmother's kitchen, a topic everyone can talk about, right? What is their grandmother's kitchen like? So then to continue, you're going to ask the students for color that they associate with that topic. And in this case, the students chose silver. Why silver? Why would your grandmother's kitchen remind you of silver? Maybe she has silver utensils. Maybe she has a teapot that's silver. Then you're going to ask students for adjectives that describe the color. And in this case, they remembered shiny, right? Shiny silver. Maybe their grandmother's polished the silver. And then on the board, the teacher will write the line that the students have created. And in this case, they created my grandmother's kitchen is shiny as a silver spoon, right? So now you're already getting an idea of what the grandmother's kitchen is like. Then you're going to, as a class still, tell the students to write a poem with the line that they just created. So this is as the whole class. And you will write this pattern on the board. It tastes like, it sounds, it smells, it looks, it makes me feel. And then divide the class into groups and assign each group one line to complete. So we have 5 different lines to complete. One group will be assigned it tastes like. One group it sounds like. One group it smells like, and so on. remembering the first line, my grandmother's kitchen is shiny as a silver spoon. Okay, so now you're having groups work on each line. So it should only take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to do that part. Then you're going to have one person, one representative from each group read the line that they have created. And you'll write that on the board. So by the end of the 5 groups, you now have your entire poem that has been jointly done, right? My grandmother's kitchen. It's as shiny as a silver spoon. It tastes like warm bread and apple pie. Very descriptive. You start to get your imagination. Maybe you're even getting hungry, right? What does it sound like? The drums beating as she kneads the dough. It smells like early spring when spices are growing. So now you're getting more sensory input and you can smell the spices. It looks like bright sunshine in the morning. It makes me feel like having a party. So you really get the idea of what students said about their grandmother's kitchen here, okay? This is one that is done with the whole group. By the way, this came from a book called Writing Simple Poems, Pattern Poetry for Language Acquisition. And this is a really good book for showing you different ways to use poetry in the classroom. So by now, students should be ready to write their own poems as individuals or in small groups. So what communicative strategies have we used here? Remember, we talked about tying those strategies to the activities that we're using in the classroom. So we're encouraging maybe risk-taking. Each student is going to give their idea of what their grandmother's kitchen is like. They're using definitely cooperative learning because they're working in groups. Maybe it's even promoting some ambiguity of, well, my grandmother's kitchen might be different from yours, right? But I'll accept these ideas. So we're working together to create this whole, and then having students do it on their own. So we have provided them an example. We have done one together as an entire group so that they have the idea, and then in however you'd like to do it, in pairs and small groups, you can even do it individually at this point. One thing I want to point out with any of these activities is you need to always think about your students and adapt whatever activity it is to your students in your class. Okay? What works for one class may not necessarily work for another. Okay, using pictures. So using pictures is great for many things in the classroom: grammatical structures, role play, dialogue schemes, telling stories, sequence and putting things in order. And you will come up on your own with much more than that. So, for example, you can these days very easily pull pictures from the internet, right? It's very easy to find a lot of pictures. And so and another thing about pictures is, since I was a teacher, a beginning teacher, maybe about 30 plus years ago, I started collecting pictures. And if you do that, I did it from magazines or newspapers. If you do that, you will have a ready-made collection of pictures that you can use over and over again with your students. So sometimes I would put them, if they were great pictures, in a plastic cover so that they didn't, get crumpled, and you can use them again. So in this picture, for example, it has many uses. For beginning level students, maybe you're going to just use it with the students describing what they see. They can describe the family and who the family members are. They can talk about the animals. We have ducks and birds and a cat. They also, at the next level, can talk about what is going on in the picture. This is a great one for what are they doing, right? So for example, Paul is watering the flowers. The cat is climbing the tree. The cat is chasing the birds. Mike is washing the window. Mrs. Green is listening to the radio. If your students don't have this vocabulary, help them out by putting some vocabulary on the board so that they will have that to choose from, right? There are many ways to adapt things to lower levels, and that's one of them. Okay. All right. This next activity is called Desert Island, and I do have a handout for you all on this desert island activity. But let's say, for example, take a look at this picture. People are happily in their boat, rowing the boat. The water looks quite calm, doesn't it? They look like they're happy. They're enjoying what they're doing. But things can change quite rapidly. Oh my goodness, this picture is quite different, right? There's a storm at sea. A big storm is happening. I'm going to ask you to pretend that you were on this boat and a storm happened and your boat, what happened? It was destroyed. You're very near a desert island and you need to get to that island. So you help each other, you try to swim to the island so that you can survive. This looks much nicer, right? But you get to the island and there's not much there. There's not much at the island. It's a pretty small island. But there are some trees, maybe there are some coconuts you can find. So there are ways you can survive on this island. So this is the activity to give your students pictures, once again, of different, and you can use whatever comes to mind for you for survival on a desert island. In this case, it's a knife, maybe some matches, maybe a tarp to cover things, water, food, a rope, a net, first aid kit, a compass, some hiking boots, and you will think of other items to use. So what you would do in this case is to put the students in groups, right? And within their groups, they are going to pick 3 items that they think are the most essential for surviving on the desert island. So first of all, within their group, each person needs to share their ideas and convince the other people that they're right? That this is the most important thing that we need. For example, we need a net to catch fish, right? So that we have food to survive. So once the group has come up with 3 items for each group, then you're going to, as a class, discuss what items they chose and why. And this gives the chance for students to vocalize, to speak and talk about what their group came up with. But it also is kind of a critical thinking. It promotes critical thinking because students have to really think about why they chose certain items. Once again, this one is probably for a little bit more advanced group because they have more of the terminology and the language to be able to do this. However, you can do it with lower level students as long as you pre-teach some vocabulary and you preface everything with the vocabulary and ideas about it. So this is just one activity that is quite communicative, right? And it allows the students time to talk. You've all heard of teacher talk time, student talk time. You want the students to be able to use their time in class and not have to listen to the teacher and the teacher lecture for an hour, for example. Just using pictures, once again, as I said, I've collected many pictures over the years, but these days it's so easy to download pictures from the internet. In this case, I would probably have a picture for as many students as I have in class. And there are many activities that you can do with students. You can pair them together and have each one, for example, not show their picture and describe their picture, and the other student tries to draw what that picture looks like. You can create dialogues with pictures. So they look at each picture and decide what they're talking about. Where are they? Who are they? You can create a profile with pictures. So each student would decide, oh, this is Susan and she is from Arizona and she's a student, all of those things. And then you can have students mingle and talk about their persona. So, and I'm sure that you can come up with also many ideas for using pictures in your classroom. Okay. So using comics and stories is also a great way, especially for using sequencing, which I'll show you in a moment. I put this book in here just because I know that I saw this book in the American Space in Tajikistan, and it is a great, great book for teachers to use, enjoy, or use easy, true stories. And it is a picture-based beginning reader. So it's great for beginning level students, but they have also many levels. They have an intermediate, there's a very easy book also, but each one has about 12 pictures that come with stories, and you can copy those and cut up the story and use it for many, many activities. So if you have a chance, look at In American Space if you are not already familiar with this book. And I encourage you to use it because it really is a great one for using stories in your classroom and pictures. So you'll make several copies of the story, cut the pictures up into frames. I usually use little envelopes so that I can keep track of the pictures, and then you'll distribute this to your groups. You're going to have students once again in groups, and the students will take out those little frames and they will try to put the picture in order. And then maybe you could even have them write one sentence for each frame of the picture. And then each group has their story based on the picture, and they can tell their story. And it's interesting to see that each group will come up with a little bit of a different story. I'd like you to take a look at these pictures. So the first picture, what's happening? What's happening in that picture? The girl looks like she has an umbrella and she's staying pretty dry, right? She's happy because she has her umbrella. But in the next picture to the right, it looks very different. What happened? Once again, it's kind of like in our desert island story. Everything is changing and there's a big wind and rain and probably very bad weather, maybe lightning, and her umbrella is sailing away, right? But what happens? A crow picks up her umbrella. The big bird in the picture, a crow picks up the umbrella and takes it back to the crow family. And the crow family is now going to use that umbrella for its nest, right? So you can see how you could cut these up. You could have students, individual students or groups of students, put them together in the story and then write their little description of each frame of the story. Excuse me. I am going to read to you what the students came up with. Now, these were advanced students. So Mary, they named the girl Mary. Mary is happy to be in the rain as her beautiful new umbrella keeps her dry. However, the umbrella is unable to withstand the power of a sudden storm. The umbrella flies away, but then a father crow gets a brilliant idea and takes it to his family to convert into a nest. Now the crow family lives happily together in their new umbrella nest. So you can see how this can create an activity for the students quite easily. Okay, and this came from a book. It's actually TESOL Press book, and it's New Ways in Teaching with Humor. in the classroom. So it's kind of it's got a lot of interesting ideas for classroom activities. The next one, 5-point star. This one, you really don't need any kind of pictures or anything. What we usually do is just draw a 5-point star on the board. This would be my example to the students. I would draw the star, and then I would put either places or years or dates or people, names of people. And this is going to create a guessing game. This activity is really good to use at the very beginning of a class when students don't know each other too well, because it allows them to get to know each other. So in this case, for example, I would have, these are significant events or significant people in my life. So students are going to guess what event that is that I use. So for example, I put New York on top. Students are going to guess, and they'll come up with all kinds of guesses. And finally, someone might guess, oh, you were born in New York. Yes, that's why I used New York. I was born in New York. Michigan, after several guesses from students. And if they don't get it, it's okay, or you can help guide them to it. So Michigan is where I went to school, so that where I got my master's degree in TESOL. So this is a significant event in my life. 1986, I used that one because that's when I got married. Oscar. Many times students will guess, oh, it's your husband, or it's someone important to you, your father maybe. This happens to be my cat, my very first cat, Oscar. So try to use some things maybe that aren't quite as obvious. And then Dushanbe, of course, is where I became an English language fellow. So using this example, using your own example, you can then have the students make their own star and put events, major events in their life, and then work with a partner, right, to be able to kind of get to know each other. It's kind of a fun activity that, once again, promotes language, and it promotes communicative language, and it is something that the students are familiar with because it's their own life. Okay, trivia game. Check my time, we're good. Okay, so trivia game. We're going to, trivia is just little bits of information and knowledge. You know how sometimes you have little pieces of info in your head and you say, I'm not even sure how I knew that, but you're using all of those ideas in this game. So I would put students in groups of 4 or 5 students, depends on how many you have in your class. And then as the teacher, I have a list of trivia questions and I have the answers. So I'm going to use that to ask questions. But I tell the students, be kind of as quiet as possible when you're discussing the answers, because you don't want the neighboring group to hear the answers, right? Your answers. One person from each group is going to come up. So I would call one person from each group, come up to the front. I, as the teacher, will ask the trivia question. And then those students have to remember the question, and they go back to their group and they ask the question. So one student in the group is going to write the answers, not the question, just the answers. But then I don't give them very much time in between before I ask the next person in each group. So they're taking turns from groups. All students are active. They come to the front. I ask them the question. They go back to their group. And this continues, right, until we've asked all of the trivia questions. Maybe you can use as many as you like, depending on the time that you have. Ask 20, ask 25 questions. And then as a group, you're going to review, right, the questions and the answers, and students will tick off how many they have right, and the group with the most correct answers wins. So it's kind of a fun, interactive activity. It does, I will warn you, if you try to use this, get a little bit noisy. As far as the questions, you can use whatever questions you like. You can look up and find, you know, just random trivia questions, or you can use questions that have come from your lesson, right? Maybe you just finished a lesson on the environment, then you're going to use environmental questions that are related to your lesson. And it's kind of like a review for students as well. So here's just some sample questions. This is kind of Central Asia centric. So where is the largest flagpole in Central Asia located? And then students would go back. And of course, that one we know is in Tajikistan. What does the name Dushanbe mean? They go back and so it means Monday, right? Where did the apple originate? It was Kazakhstan. And what is the highest peak in Nepal? Mount Everest. So just some sample questions that we used with our group when we were practicing this among the teachers in Dushanbe. Short talks. This one is great for students just either at the very beginning of class as a warm-up kind of activity, or it can be a review, once again, of something that you have taught the students. But we're just going to have topics on these cards, like you can use little index cards or even pieces of paper if you don't have that. And they have a topic that you would like the students to talk about. And so we're going to have each student choose or draw one card, and then they're given about 5 minutes or so to prepare some ideas and something that they want to say about that topic. Then the students are going to present for 1 to 3 minutes. I like to do this one in pairs or small groups because it's less pressure on a student. You know, if you call each student up individually in front of the class, that's a lot of pressure for them, especially if it's a topic that maybe they don't feel is quite right for them. So it's much easier to have them share in pairs or in group work, which goes back to our philosophy also of creating an atmosphere of friendliness in the classroom so that students are not afraid to make a mistake, let's say. Here's another one called Party Talk. Party Talk is something you can use. I've used this many times in my classroom. What you do is at the very beginning of a lesson, I would pick out, or even a reading that you want the students to do, I pick out key vocabulary or key ideas from that, and I just put them in various parts along the page. And each student would get one copy, and then they will go around and talk to each other about these ideas. For example, they would talk about what do you know about climate change, or what are oil spills? When was the most recent oil spill? What do you think of global warming? Do you think that's true? Is it not true? And so they are talking to each other. They haven't read the article or they haven't seen what it is you're going to present, but they're already accessing their schema in their head. They're already accessing what they know about this topic, right? And if there's something that they don't know, they can ask another student, like, what is smog? Do you know what that is? Every once in a while, there's a word or two that none of the students know. And then they're anxious to hear, what does that word mean? So it's just a way to interactively have students start to think about the topic that you're going to be presenting. Communicative teaching, speaking. So I've presented lots of activities. And how do these activities use the communicative teaching strategies that we talked about? So we're using lowering inhibitions, right? Some of them were guessing games, role play, songs, and a lot of group work or pair work. We're encouraging risk-taking, using fluency exercises. At this point, I would say most of these exercises, errors are not corrected. However, there's nothing wrong with the teacher maybe recasting what the student has said incorrectly into the correct form, right? But in general, these are encouraging communicative language. So students don't need to be corrected at every turn or taught the correct grammar at this point. The reason is we want them to feel comfortable with speaking. We want them to feel comfortable communicating with each other. So a lot of group work, we're promoting this collaborative learning and students sharing what they know. We're encouraging that big picture thinking, the right brain processing with movies, games, readings, and we're encouraging critical thinking skills in some, like, for example, the desert island activity. Okay, so the last piece I would like to talk about is the communicative teaching, the flipped classroom. Hopefully you have heard of this, but if not, it is a pedagogical approach. And what we're going to say here is that students are introduced, we are kind of flipping the idea. The traditional classroom has the teacher at the front telling students or informing them, having them take notes, filling their heads with knowledge. This is going to flip that idea and say students are going to get that at home. And then when they come to class, they are free to talk about that content and to use the time in the classroom for student interaction and student teacher interaction and talking. So interaction moves from group learning to individual learning at home, and group learning becomes much more dynamic and interactive in the classroom. This is Bloom's taxonomy. You've probably heard of that, but we're using a flipped classroom analogy. So here, normally these lower skills of just remembering and understanding, normally those were taught in the classroom, right? But now we're going to flip that and we're going to do that at home. We're going to have students do any of the passive activities, such as reading, such as viewing a video. Some teachers even tape their lectures so that students can watch them at home. Maybe you can ask students to watch a YouTube video at home or give them a reading to take home. They're doing this kind of individual work at home. So they're prepared now when they come to class, and you can see on the chart during class, applying and analyzing. They're going to work in groups. They're going to maybe work in pairs, whatever you decide, but they're taking the information that they have already processed on their own, and now they're using the time wisely in the classroom. They're using the time to be able to actually speak and communicate. This is a great idea for speaking. And then use the after class time once again for evaluating and maybe creating, but that core of applying and analyzing is now done in the classroom. So we're flipping the traditional idea of the teacher-centered classroom, and it becomes much more student-centered classroom this way. And so what are the benefits here? The benefits of the flipped classroom, we're going to increase this student-to-student interaction. Teachers will get to know students better because they're able to communicate and hear what the students are thinking. Student increases actually the student-teacher interaction and the collaborative learning, which was one of our objectives at the beginning, right? This was taken by by an article from Michigan State University. How can you do this? This is one example. You probably all know TED Talks. If you don't, you can look that up, TED Talks. It's a whole series of talks on just about any topic you can imagine, some of them short, some of them long. You can get transcripts of these talks. And so we're going to assign the student to maybe watch this TED Talk at home. Then when they come to class, you are able to have them get into groups to discuss this, what it is they did for homework, right? To discuss the activity, to discuss the content of the TED Talk. Otherwise, you're spending maybe 15 or even 20 minutes of the students sitting passively watching. Now, they might be taking notes and things. However, this is a way to give the students more talk time if you assign this assignment to them beforehand, and then they can talk about it in class. I'm not by any means saying every class needs to be like this and every class needs to be flipped, but it's just some ideas for you to have your class time valuable to your students. For a reading, you could divide the reading into 4 paragraphs, make copies of it, of course, and you would have maybe 5 copies of paragraph A, 5 of paragraph C, paragraph D, etc. And you're going to give those out randomly to students so that they read their paragraph at home, right? They're going through it, they're digesting it, they're maybe looking up vocabulary, and then later, when the students come to class, you will group them according to their reading. So if you had paragraph A, you are all together, paragraph B, etc., and they will discuss then what they read for homework. This is like the jigsaw activity. I think that many of you know about this. One of the things you can do after that is have each expert for each area joined together. So for example, one person from paragraph A, one from B, one from C, so that they can share their story. Or you can do it as a group and have one representative from A talk to the group about what it is they read. Okay, so I hope that you would be able to use some of these activities in your classroom. And it's just about time for some questions. So if any of you have questions about any of these activities, I'd like you to think about, can you use them in your classroom? Or how could you adapt them to beginning level students? Or how could you adapt them to your classroom? And if you have any activities that you would like to share with the group, okay? So I'd like you to think about those, and we'll come back to that, but just to give you some resources, these are some resources that I use. There's a Teach This, you can just type that in and you will find lots of activities that you can use. AmericanEnglish.state.gov, which is the US government site for American English, and there are all kinds of activities that you will find there. Breaking News English is also another site that you can go to. That's for readings. They have them at different levels and a lot of activities to go along with the readings. And then this last one is a link to, there's a brand new book. It just came out about communicative teaching. So if you're interested in learning more about communicative teaching, this is very current and very new. Okay, so we'll go back to the questions, and maybe Gulnaro, are there questions from students that we discuss?
Yes.
Hello? Yeah, I can, okay.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah, we have a number of questions. So the first one we have, what effective exercises do you use for improving fluency and accuracy?
Okay, good question, because I've been talking a lot about fluency, but not as much about accuracy. To me, the idea behind all of these particular activities is to get the students comfortable with trying. You try to praise them when they're doing a good job. You encourage them to make mistakes. But the accuracy, so you can do it in many ways, of course, it depends on your preferences, but I like to do it afterwards. So in other words, if I am doing a specific grammar point, if I'm using that picture with all of those things happening in the picture, and I say, the cat is climbing the tree. So we're trying to teach a continuous tense. Then later, after the students have tried to practice it, I will maybe show them some grammar rules and some points for them to think about for the next time they try to use these particular tenses, right? So the accuracy to me comes a little bit later. Some teachers like to teach it a little bit up front before the students use the activity, and that's fine if you feel more comfortable doing it that way. But personally, I like to let the students go ahead and do the activities and try their best. And then later, because they've had that experience of trying it, then those grammar rules are going to make more sense to them. And they're going to see, oh, okay, this is how I need to do the construction. And they themselves oftentimes will self-correct. Yeah. So it's one way of taking the focus off of making mistakes. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. A bunch of really helpful tips you shared, and we can see here in the chat box. So people are just sharing their feedback already. And we have another question here. Many thanks to this informative presentation. If as a researcher we do comparison between Bloom's taxonomy in online university class and in-person traditional class, which model is right to select for comparison in class teachers' talk context?
So are you talking there about, so you're talking about the Bloom's taxonomy chart that I put up. And I think that there's a lot of information out there about the flipped classroom. All you need to do is type that in and you will find research on the flipped classroom. Not everyone is in 100% agreement, and not everyone believes that this is the way to conduct their class. So because you still have the traditional ways of doing things, which should not be thrown out. No one is suggesting that the way that people have been doing things for many years is wrong, right? However, these are alternatives and ways for you to look at it so that you might try something in your class. Just as we're telling our students to take risks, I believe that teachers should also be taking risks in their classrooms. And if you take a look at it and try it and read a little bit more about the flipped classroom and what others are saying about it. And if you find that it works for you, then great, maybe use it once or twice in your classroom. For all of these activities, I am not suggesting it's something that you should use, or I don't prescribe things, right? It's you as the teacher have to do what is comfortable for you. And I totally understand that. The only thing I always ask teachers to do is to take a little bit of risk and do something, try a different activity and do something a little bit differently from the way you normally do. And in that way, you as a teacher expand your horizons a little bit as well. And you will watch the students and you'll see, oh, get feedback even from the students. Another thing to think about is, do you tell students what you're doing in the class? Do you give them the background of this is why we're doing this activity? Probably not always, but once in a while it's a good idea to do something like that. So the students also see, because I will tell you in my experience, students that we have at the university here come from all over the world. So they come from different learning environments. And if we are using, let's say for our example, a movie in class, we're using a clip from a movie. Students sometimes don't see the value in that. They think we're just showing them a movie. So sometimes we need to show them that this is why we're using the movie. We're using it so that you can later create dialogue, or so that you can learn the American idioms and jargon. So it gives them a focus of, oh, okay, this is why I'm doing this, and they will accept it better than just to say, okay, today is movie day, right? So hopefully that answers your question. I maybe went a little off in another direction, but.
No, just everything you are sharing, it's very wonderful. I mean, just because you are sharing from your own experience, and yeah, it's a choice of the teachers, because at the end, like learning and teaching should be fun. Only in this case, like, you know, it can be fruitful and it could be just full of results. So thank you very much for great presentation. I'm already reading the feedback from participants, and they are thanking you, Linda, for such beautiful session. So dear participants, let me remind you, today we had a very nice presentation again with our Linda Marie Chu, who is a former English language fellow in Tajikistan, and she talked about communicative teaching approach in speaking. And we are very happy to host you again someday, Linda, in person in Tajikistan. You are more than welcome to come, and so our audience will be happy to see you in person as well, who are in Tajikistan. So thanks everybody for joining today's webinar, and have a good evening, everybody. And Linda, you have a great day ahead. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone. Bye-bye.